Hey everybody, welcome back to the Migraine Mentors minicast. We are the Migraine Mentors. We're your hosts, Dr. Eric Reese, with my esteemed colleague, Dr. Thompson Mayasaka. Thompson, how are we doing today?
Doing well, man. Yeah, doing well now that the sunshine's back. How you doing?
I feel like I'm a new man. So anytime I get in front of the sun, I feel like that usually is the effect that it takes. So, and I'm sure for those of you out there
Yeah.
listening to this, I'm sure you feel the same way.
Yeah, I'm excited for this topic. I talked to most of my migraine patients about it. It's how migraines and seizures are similar, which a lot of people are kind of shocked to understand. And when you really get down into the nitty gritty of it, it's really fascinating stuff, I think.
Yeah, I don't think many people have ever really, one, put this together, but two, have ever really been told about the similarities. And so I think from the outset, when you start talking about it, and as we dig into this, you'll realize how many similarities there actually are. But, lo and behold, of course, medications that manage migraine symptoms and seizures are commonly prescribed for both conditions. And so there is a lot of interesting overlap and crossovers. Thompson, with that said, you mentioned that this is something that you kind of talk about with your patients. And so it'd be great to maybe give people a bit of foundation on the discussion and kind of why these things are similar, yet they're still so different in the presentation.
Yeah, the example I use a lot, if I'm sure you've seen a couple of people that come in with cluster headaches, is that cluster headaches are kind of like the cousins of migraines. They share a lot of similarities, but really they're slightly different in presentation. And that's kind of how I look at seizures and migraines. The seizures are kind of the big, aggressive older brother, and migraines are kind of the chill cousin. So it's just like most people hear seizure and they think, these wild, violent, convulsive events that just kind of come and go, like a big, drive-by shooting of a neurologic event. But migraines are a much more slow, drawn-out process, not as aggressive. Sometimes it can take hours for the migraine process to start and for it to go all the way through your nervous system and finish. It's really interesting if you look at a brain scan of someone that has a migraine. Instead of a big lightning storm, it kind of looks like a forest fire. It just starts in the back usually, which is why people get these visual aura symptoms. And it just kind of burns slowly from back to front. The sort of the cool part, the easiest way I think to understand how migraines are classified and diagnosed is as that forest fire kind of runs its course and starts to kind of wreak havoc, any area that is previously unstable for a variety of reasons we'll talk about in a minute. Those areas that are the most unstable fail, just metabolically can't handle any more activity. And those are the areas that give you symptoms. So people with relatively unstable occipital cortex in the back, if you have unstable neurons there, you'll get visual symptoms. Those are the people that typically get the visual auras. If your vestibular system is imbalanced and just is unstable and resistant to activity, your diagnosis was likely vestibular migraine. So when you look at it that way, the primary symptoms that come about during these little attacks are usually a pretty good indicator of, okay, those are the areas that need the most treatment. And from there, you can just be a little bit more specific in terms of what you do with people. Be curious to see how the conversation with your patients go, Eric. How do you describe these things?
To be fair, it's quite similar to what you just mentioned. I think the analogy you gave as a slow burning fire is actually a phenomenal analogy to use because it really kind of is like that. We can get all scientific on what that actually is going on, but I think the weakest chain in the link is probably how your symptoms are going to manifest. And so, which is a bit of a trip because that is kind of why medications can work for a bunch of different types of migraine symptoms, but it's also why medications can also not work for a lot of different migraine symptoms, because if it's not affecting a specific area as laser focused as you would need it to be, then you may not get the symptomatic relief you're looking for. When you talk about these similarities and how there are differences, what's interesting to me is the fact that there are genetic predispositions for both of these. There are some similar genetic aspects to this. And so I think one of the videos you posted kind of went viral. One of the videos that I talked about, one migraine and seizure, kind of went viral too, where there's a lot of people where they're like, oh, well, of course this makes sense. I take similar medications as my, parent or my sibling, and they have seizures, but I have migraine headaches, right? Or migraine attacks. And then there's other people that are like, well, this is interesting because I actually started off getting seizures and now I have migraine, or vice versa. And so, the saying kind of goes where your genetics load the gun, metaphorically speaking, but the environment kind of pulls the trigger. You can't change your genes. Those are handed down to you by your parents. But what you can change is you can change the expression of those genes. And so we all have genes that can promote inflammation theoretically, but you can also live a healthy life and eat well and sleep well and move well and turn those genes off so you don't have excessive amounts of inflammation. And so just because you have the genetic predisposition for it doesn't mean that you're set that way or it needs to happen. And Thompson, I feel like a lot of the patients that have come into our office, they usually have a family history of these sort of things. But when they walk out and they're getting better and they're doing better, it's like you're no longer limited to your genetic pool. And so any tips or tricks or advice that you would give from your clinical experience for those people who are still struggling out there with migraine symptoms and have yet to find solutions?
Yeah, I mean, to that point along the genetic conversation, if you hear the word genetic, yes, that does mean it's passed from your parents. There are also a set of unique characteristics of the genetics of people that actually get true migraine. It's a super misdiagnosed disorder. We can have a whole episode on that, and we probably will. But one of the interesting aspects that many people with migraine express is the cells in your body leak out these things called electrolytes. In order for a nerve to be healthy, you need a difference in charge from the outside to the inside. That's how it conducts electricity. And if you have these deficiencies in the cell membrane of your cells, these ions escape out accidentally. Usually it needs to be a very deliberate process. So when they escape, the difference in charge from outside to inside gets very narrow, and a very narrow charge means it's much easier to get that specific cell to discharge and fire. So if you have these areas that, because of your genes, have a very narrow membrane potential, when that forest fire runs through, that's one of the main factors that's going to make those areas susceptible to failing metabolically. So one of the easiest things we tell everybody, it's just a non-negotiable for 100% of people that have migraine, true migraine, just supplement electrolytes. Such an easy way to make sure that that deficiency in gene doesn't cause you more symptoms than you need. So it may not prevent them entirely. It may not be a grand slam home run for you, but it is absolutely 100% a safe, relatively cheap, easy way to mitigate some of those symptoms. It's such an important, if you look up all the research on sodium and magnesium deficiency in people with migraine, you only need to see one, and it's just so unanimous. That would be the easiest low-hanging fruit. If anyone out there listening gets migraines and they're not doing that, that is just basic, absolute non-negotiable, at least in our clinic.
Yeah, I will say this. You've also turned me on to taking electrolytes, and I'm fortunate enough that I don't get headaches or chronic migraine symptoms, but I just feel better. I just feel like I have more energy. I feel like I take them during workouts as well. You know, you're losing electrolytes when you're doing physical activity and or just throughout the day when you're thinking. And so you've kind of converted me to getting back onto that train. And I think I talked about this in a previous episode where like I'm kind of on a train for things sometimes and I kind of lose faith a little bit and I'm like, I'll get back on it. And so you really kind of open my eyes up to the importance of those things. It is such an easy fundamental thing that most people take for granted. And I've put patients on it and I've seen some really cool changes with it. Always never going to be just a cure all, but like you said, it's an easy low hanging fruit and a great step to take. And with that said, too, I think one of the big things that we've also witnessed clinically in the office as well is that, when you have these neurons that are unstable and those ions are being leaky and these cells aren't functioning very well, one of the other factors that really weighs into this too is just inflammation, right? Inflammation can kind of gunk up the systems and the metabolic processes that are needed for you just to function really well. And so one of the big things that we've talked about with a lot of our patients is just modifying their diet. It's well known for migraine symptoms that there are triggers like red wine, chocolates. I mean, you can kind of go on, and every person may or may not have specific sensitivities, but the diet is such an essential part of treating migraine symptoms. And it'll always be a part of that structural, neurological, and nutritional paradigm that we always bring to the table, not because we want to, but because we genuinely have to. But with that said, it's such a key aspect to it that I have yet to find a case, and maybe I'm mistaken and you've had cases like this, but I've yet to find a case of chronic migraine symptoms where we haven't done things structurally. We've also had to do things neurologically, and we've also for sure had to do things metabolically.
Very, very rare. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had one case, like my second case ever. It was a vagal nerve issue and a cervical spine issue. So like the first two things I did were vagal nerves, it just completely on accident. Had not developed the clinical acumen to, super specifically diagnosed, and the first two things I tried completely cured, and I was like super on my high horse. And then the next case that came in was like the most complex thing ever, and it was like, okay, maybe I'm not that good yet.
Clinical practice. They call it practice for a reason, right? So
Absolutely.
Thompson, would you have any parting words for those of the individuals who are listening to this? You know, we're just talking before we recorded this, and you said some really powerful things that I think are worth repeating. So if you wanted to just finish it up with kind of just some words or some different aspects of how people can start thinking and really what they should be doing when they're dealing with some of these symptoms.
Totally. Yeah. It's a really short backstory. When I was in school learning all this cool neurology stuff, I was previously, up to that point, the overwhelming majority of my life, was one of those people that just assumed we all get headaches, and if they get bad, we all get nausea and feel light sensitive, and that's a migraine. I had myself claimed to have had migraines in the past when I hadn't. And so when I took this course on migraine and peeked under the cover and realized it's this whole complex neurologic condition with all these complex factors, and headache is just one of like 1,000 symptoms that come with it, I was like, oh my gosh, like that's like I'm in neurology school and I still am one of the people that are just like part of this perpetuating problem. Is the whole point I'm making is that the realization I had was stuck with me so strongly, and I still feel so passionately that if everybody would just take migraine out of the headache bucket list and just put it in the seizure list, people would give it the respect it deserves. And you would no longer have to have these countless discussions with ignorant people like I was previously, that it's more than just a headache, it's this whole other thing. It's such an exhausting thing to constantly have to explain yourself like that. And I think because if the whole world would see it as this more serious seizure disorder, that there would not be as much suffering emotionally, there would not be as much comorbid anxiety and depression associated with this disorder. All of that stuff is just needless and preventable if we just would just listen and maybe consider thinking about things a little differently. I just think that would make life so much easier for everybody, and it would help us all become less ignorant and actually better informed.
Well, that is no truer words have been said. We'll put it that way. And I think there's something to be said too about the fact that you think you know something, and then you're completely humbled and wrong, or you're at least learning on what you know and what you don't know. And so I think that will hit a lot of home runs for a lot of people and really resonates. With that said, we're going to conclude this. This once again, the Migraine Mentors minicast. We are your Migraine Mentors. Our newsletter gets published every Wednesday morning at 6 a.m. Central Time, and our whole goal is to empower you, educate you, and inform you on how to take care and manage your symptoms at home without using medications or any overt pharmaceuticals. Our goal is to have it be natural, holistic, and integrated for you. And if you are a subscriber to the newsletter, thank you for subscribing and supporting us. And if you aren't a subscriber, what are you waiting for? Every Wednesday, we're going to put out some content. We've always got some great things to entertain you, things that are informative. And we've also got a great recipe every week, too, that you can use to make your life a little bit easier. So if you're not a subscriber, go click the link below in the YouTube description. And we hope to see you soon. Thank you once again, and we'll see you again at the next episode.